My name is Captain Rachel Stone. I'm 32 years old, and I thought serving my country meant something until my own family looked me in the eye and said, Rachel abandoned us for the military. What I discovered next proved that while I was saving lives overseas and serving with honor, my husband and sister were busy destroying everything I had sacrificed to protect. Before I tell you how one phone call from my commanding officer shattered every lie my family had told about my service, and how military records exposed the true heroism they had dismissed as abandonment, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how two words, 47 lives, silenced an entire room and made my family realize they had betrayed someone who had literally saved dozens of people while they focused on their own selfish desires. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. I joined the Army at 18, straight out of high school in small-town Ohio, driven by a desire to serve my country and prove that I could handle anything life threw at me. My family, my parents, Tom and Linda, and my younger sister Amy, had mixed feelings about my decision to enlist. "Why can't you just go to college like normal kids?" Mom asked when I announced my plans. "The military is dangerous, and it's no place for a young woman." But I was determined to serve, and after 8 years of active duty, I had built a successful career as a combat medic, eventually earning my commission as an officer. I had deployed twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq, providing emergency medical care in some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. Military life had given me confidence, purpose, and skills I never could have developed anywhere else. I had learned to make life-or-death decisions under pressure, to lead soldiers through impossible circumstances, and to find strength I never knew I possessed. 4 years ago, during a brief leave between deployments, I met Marcus Williams at a friend's wedding. Marcus was 29, worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, and seemed genuinely interested in my military career and experiences. "I've never met anyone as brave as you," he told me during our first real conversation. "What you do overseas, saving lives and serving your country, that's incredible." Marcus seemed different from other men I had dated, who were often intimidated by my military service or couldn't understand the demands of my career. He asked thoughtful questions about my deployments, supported my dedication to service, and made me feel proud of what I did, rather than defensive about my choices. We had a whirlwind romance during my 6-week leave, and when it came time for me to report to my next assignment, Marcus proposed. "I want to be part of your life," he said. "I want to support your service and build a future together." We were married in a small ceremony just before I deployed to Afghanistan for my 3rd tour. Marcus moved to the military base housing, and we began the challenging process of building a marriage around the demands of active military service. The first year of our marriage was difficult but manageable. Marcus seemed to understand that my deployments were part of my commitment to the military, and he was supportive during our video calls and email exchanges while I was overseas. My family, however, was less understanding. Amy, who was 28 and worked as a dental hygienist, had always been the family favorite. The daughter who stayed close to home, dated local boys, and followed a traditional path that my parents understood and approved of. When I got married and immediately deployed again, Amy began making comments about how I was choosing the military over family. "Rachel's never around anymore," she complained to our parents. "She gets married and then immediately leaves for another deployment. That's not how marriage is supposed to work." My parents echoed these concerns during our phone calls. "When are you going to settle down and start a real life?" Dad would ask. "You can't stay in the military forever." "Marcus must be lonely with you gone all the time," Mom would add. "It's not fair to him." These comments stung because I was already struggling with the guilt and isolation that came with military marriage. Being deployed while newly married was emotionally challenging, and my family's criticism made it harder rather than providing the support I needed. But Marcus continued to be understanding and supportive during that first deployment. "I knew what I was signing up for when I married you," he would tell me during our video calls. "Your service is important, and I'm proud of you." When I returned from that deployment after 10 months overseas, Marcus and I had 2 wonderful weeks together before I received orders for my current assignment, an 18-month deployment to Syria as part of a special medical unit, providing emergency care in a combat zone. This deployment was different from my previous tours. We were attached to a forward operating base in an extremely dangerous area, providing trauma care for both military personnel and civilians caught in the conflict. The work was intense, demanding, and often heartbreaking. We treated soldiers with catastrophic injuries, civilians who had been caught in crossfire, and children who had been wounded by explosive devices. But it was also the most meaningful work I had ever done. Every day, our medical team made decisions that meant the difference between life and death for the people who came through our trauma bay. The communication with home during this deployment was more difficult than previous tours. Internet access was limited and unreliable, phone calls were infrequent, and there were weeks when I couldn't contact Marcus or my family at all due to security restrictions. During the few times I was able to speak with Marcus, our conversations seemed strained and distant. He complained about being alone, about not understanding why I had to be deployed for so long, and about feeling like my military career was more important to me than our marriage. "When are you coming home?" he would ask during every call. "I can't keep living like this." "I understand it's hard," I would try to explain, "but this deployment is important. We're saving lives here." "What about our life?" Marcus would reply. "What about starting a family? What about having a normal marriage?" These conversations left me feeling guilty and conflicted. I believed in the mission I was serving, but I also wanted to be a good wife and eventually a mother. My family's attitude toward my deployment was even more difficult to handle. "Rachel's been gone for over a year," Amy told our parents during a family call that included me. "She's missing everything important that's happening at home." "We never see her anymore," Mom added. "It's like she's not even part of the family." "The military has changed her," Dad concluded. "She cares more about strangers overseas than she does about her own family." These accusations were particularly painful because they were the opposite of the truth. I missed my family desperately and thought about home every day, but I also knew that the work I was doing was literally saving lives, and I couldn't abandon my responsibilities or my fellow soldiers. 6 months ago, the communications from home began to change in ways that should have been warning signs. Marcus stopped asking when I was coming home and started talking about moving on with his life. When I asked what he meant, he would be vague about his plans and dismissive of our future together. "Maybe the military is more important to you than marriage," he said during one particularly difficult call. "That's not true," I replied. "You're important to me. Our marriage is important to me." "Then prove it," Marcus said. "Come home." "I can't just leave my deployment," I explained. "I have responsibilities here. People are counting on me." "People are always counting on you," Marcus replied coldly. "What about me? When do I get to count?" The conversation ended badly, and it was the last real discussion Marcus and I had about our marriage. Around the same time, Amy's communications with me became less frequent and more superficial. She stopped sharing details about her life and seemed uncomfortable during our family video calls. "Amy's been really busy," Mom would explain when I asked why my sister seemed distant. "She's been helping us with a lot of things since you've been gone." I assumed Amy was just living her life and perhaps felt awkward trying to relate to my deployment experiences. The emotional distance hurt, but I attributed it to the natural drift that sometimes happens between siblings with very different lives. 3 months ago, I stopped hearing from Marcus altogether. His emails became infrequent and brief, and he stopped answering my calls entirely. When I asked my family about Marcus during our video calls, they gave vague, uncomfortable answers. "Marcus is fine," Dad would say. "He's just busy with work." "You know how it is," Mom would add. "Men don't like to talk on the phone as much as women do." Amy would usually change the subject when Marcus's name came up, which I found strange but didn't have time to investigate thoroughly given my demanding work schedule. I began to worry that my marriage was in serious trouble, but there wasn't much I could do from a military base in Syria, except continue serving my deployment and hope that Marcus and I could repair our relationship when I returned home. 2 weeks ago, I received the orders I had been waiting for. Deployment complete, return home scheduled for the following Friday. I was excited and nervous about reuniting with Marcus and my family after 18 months overseas. I had no idea what condition my marriage was in, but I was hopeful that being home would allow us to reconnect and rebuild our relationship. I sent emails to Marcus and my family announcing my return date, but the responses were oddly muted. No one seemed particularly excited about my homecoming, which hurt but didn't prepare me for what I was about to discover. Last Friday, I flew from Syria to Germany to Virginia, and finally to Columbus, Ohio, completing the long journey home after 18 months of deployment. The plan was for Marcus to pick me up at the airport, but when I landed and turned on my phone, I had a text message saying he was unable to make it and suggesting I take a taxi home. I was disappointed but not entirely surprised. Our relationship had been strained, and maybe Marcus needed more time to process my return. I took a taxi to the house Marcus and I had rented before my deployment, excited to surprise him and begin the process of reconnecting with my husband. But when the taxi pulled up to our address, the house was completely dark. There were no cars in the driveway, no lights in the windows, and the lawn was overgrown as if no one had been maintaining the property. I used my key to enter the house and immediately realized that Marcus no longer lived there. The furniture was gone, the utilities were disconnected, and there was a thick layer of dust over everything that remained. Marcus had moved out months ago, leaving no forwarding address or explanation. I stood in our empty house, jet-lagged and confused, trying to understand what had happened to my marriage and my home while I was serving overseas. My first instinct was to call my family, who would surely know where Marcus was and what had happened to our living situation. I called Mom's cell phone, and she answered on the third ring. "Rachel, you're home," she said, though her voice sounded strained rather than excited. "Mom, I'm at the house, but Marcus isn't here. It looks like he moved out. What happened?" There was a long pause before Mom answered. "Honey, you should come over here. We need to talk." The tone of her voice made my stomach drop. Something was very wrong. "Mom, where is Marcus? Is he okay?" "He's fine," Mom replied carefully. "But there are some things you need to know. Come over, and we'll explain everything." I took another taxi to my parents' house, growing more anxious with each mile. What could have happened that required an in-person explanation? Why was everyone being so evasive about Marcus's whereabouts? When I arrived at my childhood home, both of my parents were waiting in the living room, looking uncomfortable and nervous. "Sit down, sweetheart," Dad said gently. "We have some things to tell you." "Where is Marcus?" I asked immediately. "Why did he move out of our house? Why didn't anyone tell me what was happening?" Mom and Dad exchanged glances, clearly struggling with how to begin the conversation. "Rachel, Marcus has been staying here," Mom said finally. "Staying here? At your house? Why?" "Because he was lonely with you gone," Dad explained. "He needed family support during your deployment." I was confused but not yet alarmed. It made sense that Marcus might want to be closer to my family while I was overseas. "Okay, so where is he now? Why isn't he here to welcome me home?" That's when Mom delivered the news that began to unravel everything. "Marcus is at Amy's apartment. They've been spending a lot of time together while you've been gone." "Spending time together?" I repeated, not understanding the implications. Dad took a deep breath. "Rachel, Marcus, and Amy have developed a relationship." The words didn't compute at first. "A relationship? What kind of relationship?" "What do you mean, a relationship?" I asked. "They're together," Mom said quietly. "Romantically. They've been together for about 6 months." The world seemed to tilt sideways. My husband and my sister were together? Romantically? "You mean they're dating?" I asked, still trying to process the information. "They're living together," Dad confirmed, "at Amy's apartment." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My husband was living with my sister. While I was deployed, serving my country, risking my life in a combat zone, my husband and sister were building a life together. "How long has this been going on?" I managed to ask. "About 6 months," Mom repeated. "They didn't plan for it to happen, but they grew close while you were gone. And what?" I demanded. "And they fell in love," Dad finished. I stared at my parents, trying to understand how they could be so calm about delivering news that my marriage and my relationship with my sister had been destroyed while I was serving overseas. "You've known about this for 6 months?" I asked. "We hoped they would figure things out before you came home," Mom said. "We didn't want to upset you while you were in a dangerous place. So you just let me serve my deployment thinking my marriage was intact while my husband was living with my sister. We thought it was better if you found out when you got home," Dad explained. The betrayal was overwhelming. Not only had Marcus and Amy been together for 6 months, but my parents had known and had chosen to let me continue my dangerous deployment without knowing that my entire life had been destroyed. "Where are they now?" I asked. "They're at Amy's apartment," Mom said. "They know you're home. They're waiting to talk to you." "They're waiting to talk to me?" I repeated incredulously. "My husband left me for my sister while I was deployed, and they're waiting to talk to me?" "Rachel, try to understand," Dad said. "You've been gone for 18 months. Marcus was lonely. Amy was here. These things happen." "Ugh, these things happen?" I stood up, shaking with anger. "My husband having an affair with my sister while I'm serving in a combat zone, that just happens?" "You were never here," Mom said, her voice taking on a defensive tone. "Marcus needed companionship. Amy needed someone who understood what it was like to miss you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents were defending my husband's affair with my sister by blaming my military service. "So this is my fault for being deployed?" "Nobody's saying it's your fault," Dad replied. "But you have to understand that your military service put a strain on everyone, not just you." "Marcus tried to make the marriage work," Mom added. "But you were never available. You were always overseas, always focused on the military instead of your family." The accusations were like knives. I had served my country with honor, had saved lives, had sacrificed my comfort and safety to serve something larger than myself, and my family was framing my service as neglect of my marriage. "I was serving my country," I said, my voice shaking. "I was deployed. I didn't have a choice about being available." "You had a choice about joining the military," Mom replied. "You had a choice about deploying so often. You chose the military over your marriage." "And Marcus chose my sister over his marriage vows," I shot back. "That's not fair," Dad said. "Marcus was loyal for a long time, but 18 months is too long to expect someone to wait." I realized that my parents had completely rewritten the narrative of my deployment to justify Marcus and Amy's betrayal. In their version, I had abandoned my family for the military, and Marcus and Amy were victims of my selfishness, rather than people who had betrayed someone serving overseas. "I need to see them," I said. "Rachel, maybe you should wait until tomorrow," Mom suggested. "You're tired and emotional. This conversation might go better if you take some time to process." "No," I said firmly. "I need to see my husband and my sister now." Dad drove me to Amy's apartment complex, a 10-minute ride during which he continued trying to justify what had happened. "Rachel, I know this is hard, but try to see it from their perspective. You've been gone for 18 months. They found comfort in each other during a difficult time. They found comfort in betraying me," I replied. "That's not how they see it," Dad said. "They see it as two people who were both missing you, finding a way to cope together." When we arrived at Amy's apartment, I could see Marcus's car in the parking lot. My husband was indeed living with my sister, just as my parents had said. I knocked on Amy's door, and after a few minutes, she opened it. She looked nervous and guilty, but not surprised to see me. "Rachel," she said quietly. "You're home." "So I've heard," I replied. "Can I come in?" Amy stepped aside, and I entered the apartment I had never seen before. Marcus was sitting on the couch, looking uncomfortable but not ashamed. The apartment was clearly set up for two people living together. Marcus's belongings were mixed with Amy's, and there were photos of them together on the walls. "Rachel," Marcus said, standing up. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I agreed. "When did you move out of our house?" "About 4 months ago," Marcus replied. "The lease was up, and I couldn't afford the rent alone." "So you moved in with my sister instead of waiting for me to come home?" Marcus and Amy exchanged glances, and I could see they had rehearsed this conversation. "Rachel, we didn't plan for this to happen," Amy said. "But with you gone for so long, Marcus and I were both struggling. We started spending time together, and feelings developed." "Feelings developed," I repeated. "While I was deployed. While I was serving my country." "We know the timing is bad," Marcus said, "but we can't help how we feel." "You can help what you do about how you feel," I replied. "You could have waited for me to come home. You could have divorced me before starting a relationship with my sister." "We thought about that," Marcus said, "but we weren't sure what would happen when you got home. We didn't want to make any permanent decisions. So you decided to just live together and see how things worked out?" "We were taking things day by day," Amy explained. I looked around the apartment again, seeing the life my husband and sister had built together while I was risking my life overseas. "How long have you been sleeping together?" I asked bluntly. Marcus and Amy both looked uncomfortable with the direct question. "Rachel, that's not important," Amy said. "It's important to me." "How long?" "About 6 months," Marcus admitted. "So you started having sex with my sister right around the time you stopped communicating with me?" "It wasn't like that," Amy protested. "We were friends first. We were both missing you. And we found comfort in each other. And that comfort turned into a sexual relationship while I was deployed?" Neither of them answered directly. "Did Mom and Dad know you were sleeping together?" I asked. "They knew we were close," Marcus said carefully. "Did they know you were living together as a couple?" Another uncomfortable silence. "Yes," Amy admitted. "They knew." So my entire family had known that my husband was in a sexual relationship with my sister, and they had all decided to keep it secret from me while I served my deployment. "What happens now?" I asked. Marcus and Amy looked at each other again. "We want to be together," Amy said finally. "We're in love." "We want to get married," Marcus added. The casual way they announced their plans to marry while I was still legally married to Marcus was breathtaking in its cruelty. "You want to get married while you're still married to me?" I asked Marcus. "We want you to agree to a divorce so we can move forward with our lives," Marcus replied. "Our lives?" I repeated. "What about my life? What about the 18 months I spent deployed, thinking I had a marriage to come home to?" "Rachel, you were never really present in our marriage anyway," Marcus said, his tone becoming defensive. "You were always focused on the military. You were never home." "I was deployed," I said, my voice rising. "I was serving my country. I was doing my job." "Your job was more important to you than our marriage," Marcus replied. "My service was important to me, but so was our marriage. I thought you understood that when you married me." "I thought I did too," Marcus said, "but 18 months apart is too long. I needed someone who was actually present in my life." "Like my sister," I said bitterly. "Amy was here," Marcus said simply. "She was available. She cared about me." "And I didn't care about you?" "You cared about the military more than you cared about me," Marcus replied. Amy finally spoke up, and her words revealed the depth of their betrayal. "Rachel, you abandoned us for the military," she said. "You left Marcus alone for 18 months. You missed family events, holidays, important moments. You chose your career over your relationships." "I was deployed," I said, feeling like I was repeating myself endlessly. "I was serving overseas. I didn't abandon anyone." "You could have chosen a different career," Amy replied. "You could have gotten out of the military when you got married. You chose to deploy instead of choosing your family. And you chose to sleep with my husband instead of supporting your sister who was serving her country." The conversation was becoming circular and increasingly hostile. It was clear that Marcus and Amy had convinced themselves that my military service was abandonment rather than sacrifice, and that their affair was justified by my absence. "We're in love, Rachel," Amy said, as if that explained everything. "We want to be together." "Then, you should have waited until I came home and Marcus divorced me," I replied. "We couldn't wait," Marcus said. "We couldn't put our lives on hold indefinitely. You put your lives on hold for 6 months. You could have put them on hold for 6 more months until I finished my deployment." "We didn't want to wait," Amy said simply. The honesty of that statement was almost refreshing. They didn't want to wait, so they didn't. My deployment, my service, my marriage vows, none of it mattered as much as what they wanted. I left Amy's apartment that night, knowing that my marriage was over and my relationship with my sister was destroyed. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The following Monday, I received a phone call that would change the entire narrative my family had constructed about my deployment. "Captain Stone, this is Colonel Patricia Martinez from the Department of Defense," the voice said. "I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected to receive the Meritorious Service Medal for your actions during your recent deployment to Syria." I was stunned. Military awards aren't given lightly, and the Meritorious Service Medal is a significant honor. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand," I replied. "Captain Stone, your commanding officer submitted a detailed report about your service during the 18-month deployment. Your actions saved numerous lives and demonstrated exceptional courage under fire." Colonel Martinez continued reading from what was apparently an extensive commendation. The report indicates that you personally treated over 200 combat casualties during your deployment, performed emergency surgery under enemy fire, and your quick thinking and medical expertise directly saved 47 lives that would have been lost without your intervention. 47 lives. I had saved 47 people during my deployment. Additionally, Colonel Martinez continued, your leadership during the attack on Forward Operating Base Bravo was instrumental in preventing multiple casualties when the medical facility came under direct enemy fire. I remembered that attack vividly. Rockets had hit our medical compound while we were treating wounded soldiers and civilians. Instead of taking cover, our medical team had continued working to stabilize patients while the base was under fire. Captain Stone, the Department of Defense considers your service during this deployment to be exemplary. You will be receiving the Meritorious Service Medal, and your actions are being documented as a model of military medical service. After Colonel Martinez hung up, I sat in the hotel room where I was staying and tried to process what I had just learned. While my family was characterizing my deployment as abandonment and selfishness, the United States military was awarding me one of its highest honors for the same service. I had saved 47 lives. I had performed surgery under enemy fire. I had led medical teams through combat situations. I had served with honor and courage, and my actions had prevented families from losing their loved ones. But according to my husband and sister, I had abandoned my family for the military. The contrast was so stark that I felt like I was living in two different realities. That evening, I called my parents and asked them to arrange a family meeting. I wanted everyone, Mom, Dad, Amy, and Marcus, to hear something important. We met the next evening at my parents' house, and I could see that everyone was uncomfortable and dreading another emotional confrontation. I asked you all here because I received some news yesterday that I think you should know about, I began. Rachel, if this is about the divorce, we can work out the details later, Marcus said. This isn't about the divorce, I replied. This is about my deployment. I looked around the room at the 4 people who had convinced themselves that my 18 months of service were selfishness and abandonment. Yesterday, I received a call from the Department of Defense. I'm being awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for my actions during my deployment to Syria. The room was silent. The citation states that my actions directly saved 47 lives during the 18 months I was overseas. 47 people are alive today because of the work I did while I was deployed. I paused to let that information sink in. I also performed emergency surgery while our base was under enemy fire, led medical teams through combat situations, and treated over 200 combat casualties. Amy was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. The Department of Defense has documented my service as exemplary and is using my actions as a model for future military medical deployments. I looked directly at Marcus. So while you were living with my sister because I abandoned you for the military, I was saving 47 lives under enemy fire. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. I turned to Amy. And while you were sleeping with my husband because I was never here for the family, I was performing surgery during rocket attacks to save wounded soldiers and civilians. Amy was crying now, but I wasn't finished. The military didn't see my deployment as abandonment. They saw it as exceptional service to my country and to humanity. I looked at my parents. 47 families have their loved ones home today because of what I did during the 18 months you all decided I was being selfish and neglecting my family. Dad spoke first, his voice quiet and ashamed. Rachel, we didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I replied. You wanted to justify Marcus and Amy's affair, so you convinced yourselves that my service was abandonment rather than sacrifice. Mom was crying openly now. We're sorry, she whispered. We didn't understand what you were doing over there. What I was doing over there was serving my country with honor and saving lives, I said firmly. What you were doing here was betraying someone who was risking her life for others. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Rachel, I'm sorry. We didn't know about the medal or the lives you saved. You didn't know because you never asked, I replied. You were too busy building a life with my sister to care about what I was actually doing overseas. I stood up to leave. 47 lives, Marcus. 47 people are alive because of my deployment, and you left me for my sister because you thought I was being selfish. As I walked toward the door, Amy called after me. Rachel, can you ever forgive us? I turned back to look at her. Amy, you slept with my husband while I was saving lives under enemy fire. You're asking the wrong question. What's the right question? She asked. The right question is whether the 47 people whose lives I saved think my deployment was worth it. And I already know the answer to that. 6 months later, my divorce from Marcus was finalized. He and Amy are engaged and planning to marry next year. My parents have tried to rebuild our relationship, but the damage is too deep. They chose to enable betrayal rather than support service, and that choice revealed something fundamental about their character. I remain in the military and am currently stationed in Colorado, where I continue to serve as a combat medic officer. The Meritorious Service Medal hangs in my office, along with letters from some of the 47 people whose lives I saved during my deployment to Syria. The most important lesson I learned is that some people will characterize your greatest achievements as your worst failures if it serves their agenda. My family needed to believe my service was abandonment to justify their betrayal, so that's the story they told themselves. But the truth doesn't change based on other people's convenience. I saved 47 lives during my deployment. I served with honor under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. I sacrificed my comfort, my safety, and ultimately my marriage to serve something larger than myself. The woman who came home from deployment to find her husband living with her pregnant sister learned that real honor isn't determined by the people who betray you, it's determined by the people whose lives you save and the country you serve. Marcus and Amy chose their comfort over my service. My parents chose enablement over support. But 47 families have their loved ones home because I chose duty over convenience. That's a choice I'll make again every single day. Have you ever had your greatest sacrifices dismissed by people who should have been proud of you? How do you handle family members who rewrite your achievements to justify their betrayals? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about military service, family betrayal, and learning that real honor comes from serving something greater than yourself.